Behind me, this huge Soviet socialist realist sculpture commemorating the great anti-fascist fight that the Soviet Union conducted during the Second World War. It's quite ironic standing here beneath it as Ukraine fights an existential battle against what many people now regard as a fascist totalitarian state, which is modern-day Russia. It's a case of history turned upside down. The most violent armed conflict that Europe has seen since the Second World War has been in progress in Ukraine for 5 months. Putin's so-called special military operation was meant to last days, but it has not gone according to plan. When we left Kyiv in March, it was surrounded by Russian forces. But the invaders were already being outboxed. Russian convoys became bogged down, harried by Ukrainian attacks, many using drones and Western-supplied anti-tank missiles. In April, Ukrainian resistance forced them to withdraw. In the wake of their retreat, devastated cities and what appears to be evidence of war crimes. The Ukrainians scored a significant victory with the sinking of the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva. They also retook the tiny strategic rock known as Snake Island. It turned out that the island's defenders had not been killed in February, but captured. The Russian Air Force has failed to achieve air superiority. Ukrainian fighters are still in the air, and Russian planes and attack helicopters are being shot down regularly. In the south, the Russians pulverized the city of Mariupol into surrender and rubble. Some estimates place the death toll in that city alone as high as 100,000. But the defense of Mariupol caused the Russian advance on the coast to stall at Kherson. Ukraine has fought back and held the line. This is the 6th month of the war, and we're heading back to Ukraine. There are fewer people at the border crossing, but the wave of displaced people is staggering. As of late July, a couple of weeks ago, just under 6 million refugees had fled Ukraine. And within the borders of Ukraine itself, there's another 6 million displaced. These are trucks, mainly empty, waiting at the border to leave and come back with goods and supplies. The line is many kilometres long. We take the night train to Kyiv and find the city far more at ease with itself than the one we left in March. Well, I'm back here in the centre of Kyiv at the Maidan. Last time I was here was in March, and the war at that point was at a very precarious point with the Russians effectively at the gates of the capital. We're 6 months into the war now, and to some extent the Russians are a little bit on the back foot. It's a hell of a lot more busy than it was when I was here in March. And of course at that time Russian rockets and missiles were still slamming into the city, and it was very, very tense indeed, with many people fleeing both westwards and indeed across neighbouring borders into Poland and elsewhere. Many of those people have now obviously returned, not the entire population, but it is busier now. Having said that, there is growing tension around the nuclear station at Zaporizhzhia, and, you know, a little bit of nervousness around, and perhaps we could see people leaving the city again in the near future. But for the moment, it's a lively place. Cafes are full and almost normal looking. Although having said that, just a second, the air raid siren's gone off, so war's never far away. Indeed, this is a conflict which has been defined by its proximity both to Europe and Russia. The Ukrainian people are clearly gravitating towards the West. Russian strategy seems to stem from a sense of loss and underlying ownership of Ukrainian lands. The Russians want to reclaim what they imagine to be theirs. Russia has tried to isolate Ukraine from the West by strangling oil and gas supplies. They've interrupted Ukraine's grain exports, vital to world food supply, via the southern ports. An uneasy agreement brokered by Turkey in July, however, has permitted grain shipments to leave Ukraine by sea. Russian troops, thwarted by Ukrainian resistance, have occupied Europe's largest nuclear plant in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. This is a way to shield their soldiers and vehicles which can't be shelled at that location, but also to threaten Ukraine's internal energy supply. Ukraine's near allies Poland and the Baltic states have been rock solid, united in their fear of a resurgent Russia. Other Western governments led by the US have appeared galvanised rather than intimidated by the conflict. The supply of the US battlefield missile system, known as HIMARS for example, has allowed the armed forces of Ukraine to outmatch Russian mass artillery with precision long-range strikes. In short, the war in Ukraine seems to have become a proxy war between the West and Russia, between two conflicting value systems, the neo-fascist leanings of a would-be Russian empire, a closed society where dissent is violently stifled, and, for better or for worse, the open societies of the West. We are heading to Borodyanka, one of the towns north of Kyiv, which was abandoned by the Russians in April. Parts of it have been devastated. You know, there's a number of scavenging dogs here, but there's a lot of garbage and the place does stink. The dogs themselves look quite quiet at the moment, but by all accounts, they're fairly volatile and probably quite traumatised after everything that's going on here. But I'm a little bit wary of them, if truth be told. These are apartment blocks here in Borodyanka that were hit by Russian airstrikes. Behind me, though, are a few banners that locals have actually put up in the past weeks. It's a bit of a controversy because many of these people want these flats to be demolished and rebuilt so they can continue to live here. Others, including some local officials, would like some kind of memorial to mark the kind of atrocity that went on here itself. So it's kind of split the community somewhat. The main thing is that most people here appear to want to stay. This was a very close, tight community. This is the statue of the great Ukrainian poet and painter Taras Shevchenko. Clearly, during the month-long occupation by Russian forces here, they decided to make their mark, not just on the surrounding apartment blocks, which have been completely eviscerated by airstrikes and shelling, but obviously took their spite out on this statue. You know, it's another indication of an attack not just on Ukraine, but Ukrainian culture and anything that represents Ukraine's sense of nationhood or independence from Moscow. We meet Natalia, a local woman who lived through the Russian assault and its consequences. Natalia, you're from Borodyanka, yeah?
Yes.
Yes. Have you lived here all your life?
Yes, of your life.
All your life. On the buildings opposite, there are banners, you know, that locals have put up. Obviously, people who want these apartment blocks to be rebuilt. Do you agree with that?
Чесно, мені все рівно, де відбудують будинок. Чи на цьому місці, чи в іншому, головне, щоб це почали робити. А тут, ну, тут люди хочуть жити тут на цьому місці, бо це центр Бородянки, тут зручне розташування, і люди хочуть саме на цьому місці свої будинки. Ну, десь відсотків, мабуть, 80 хочуть залишитись тут жити. І саме в цих відбудованих будинках.
Can I take you back to, obviously, the time of the Russian invasion and the occupation here? What was it like for you and your family and your daughter?
1 березня, я тут була, 1 березня, коли були тут танки, заїхали, ми сховалися в підвал. Ну і в цей час авіаудар був по моєму будинку.
Потім поїхали кудись, вдалося в тепло.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Да, зараз я орендую квартиру тут недалечко. Все повертається, відкриваються магазинчики, відкриваються, інфраструктура помаленьку відбудовується.
Is your husband in the armed services, in the forces here in Ukraine?
Чоловік загинув. Військовий.
Я дуже вибачаюся. Дуже вибачаюся.
Did you ever think that Russia was capable of doing this here in Ukraine?
Ні, навіть до останнього. Навіть коли 24 лютого я встала збиратись на роботу, і мені чоловік сказав, що почалась війна. Я думала, ну це так, це може щось там день-два, якісь конфлікти будуть, і все ж це закінчиться на цьому. Такого не може бути в 21 столітті.
Not far from Borodyanka, hidden in the forest, is a wee village called Moshchun. This is where one of the pivotal battles in the struggle for Kyiv took place in February and March. The men of the Ukrainian 72nd Mechanized Brigade were ordered to fight to the last man. They took on vastly superior numbers of Russians. If Moshchun had fallen, there's every chance Kyiv could have been overrun. It's staggering just driving through here. Every other building, every other house has been destroyed. It's just, the levels of devastation are really, really stark around here. The evidence of heavy bombardment is everywhere. This is how I imagine the battle for Ukraine to be. This is the kind of place I imagine where, you know, the future of the country is decided in many ways. Not just the big cities, but in smaller communities where the resistance is fiercest. Absolutely incredible here. We can't show you the checkpoint that marks the entrance of the village, but we've been given permission to film something of interest. The hanged effigy of a Russian soldier. I suppose to many people looking at this that might seem rather tasteless, but you know, given what we've witnessed over the last few days in various places here, one can understand the degree of anger. But there is an element of humour. As one of the soldiers here pointed out, this effigy of a Russian soldier, he does have his shopping bag with him. He's just been for his groceries, and he is carrying an umbrella. But it is a rather creepy image nonetheless. This is a comparatively small community, but it played a significant part in the defence of Kyiv in the early stages of the war. And it paid an enormous price for that, which you can see across the entire village. The level of destruction is immense. You really do have to be careful moving around here. There are warning signs of unexploded devices, minefields, and there's also the danger, of course, that the Russian troops that came through here left booby traps. We meet Vadim, a local baker who took part as a civilian in the defence of Moshchun. Can you talk me through those early days of the war in February?
Воно почалось з утра. Мене збудила дружина. Говорить, щось гримить. Я виглянув в вікно, говорю, вставай, почалась війна. У нас з вікна видно аеропорт Гостомель, як прилетіли туди перший снаряд.
People say that, military people particularly, say that the defence of Moshchun was crucial and that if Moshchun had fallen, the gates to Kyiv were open to the Russians. Would you agree with that?
100%. 72-га зайшла вечором, 24-го. 12 БМП-шок, ми їх зустріли в центрі. Сережа Марханос, наш отважний пожарник. Ліс знає хорошо, в нього трактор свій. Завів, розставив їх у лісі на червоному. Ми знаємо, де, кого, куди ставити. Ми місні, ми знаємо тут все.
Do you have any idea of the numbers of defenders that were engaged in the battle?
Ну, по військовим там було більше, ніж 80 людей. А з гражданських все село. Ті були на складах, ті на охрані гостиниці, ті на бліндажах копали, ті готовили. Моя дружина і братова 12 днів хліб місили, що і об'єдналися. Я такого села я взагалі не бачив.
How is life for people that have returned?
Нас дуже багато. Кажемо, 80% всього нашого села, Moshchuna і дач знищено. Просто знищено. І дуже багато треба стройматеріалу. Треба людям перезимувати цю зиму.
How does the population now compare with before the war?
На дачах, що світла нема, там трохи задач меншиться. А в Moshchuні, ну, чоловік 700 назад вернулось спокійно.
How do you feel about the Russians now?
Такої нації для нашого народу, ну, моя думка, вона просто пропала. Винна вся Росія тим, що ну, люди ж розуміють, що їхній бункерний, він не прав.
Vladimir Putin has been acting president or prime minister of Russia since 1999. He was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB. Stationed in East Berlin in 1989, he witnessed the collapse of communism. The Russia he eventually took over was the imploded heart of a superpower. As former Warsaw Pact countries turned to the west, Putin held on to the near territories of Russia through a series of brutal wars. He prevented the breakaway of the Republic of Chechnya, and in 2008, Russia launched an invasion of the independent country of Georgia. I was there and witnessed scenes eerily reminiscent of those in Ukraine. It's almost an identical playbook. Russian troops were sent in to protect two Georgian oblasts, each with Russian-speaking populations. Both are now led by puppet regimes who have declared the desire to join Russia. In July 2021, Vladimir Putin published a long and seemingly heartfelt essay about Ukraine. In it, he argued for the indivisibility of the Russian and Ukrainian people. He talks about a triune nation made up of Russians, Ukrainians and Belarusians. This is a way of thinking
which harked back not just to the USSR, but to the Russian Empire. In this worldview, the idea of Ukrainian nationhood or identity is neither here nor there. Putin's essay now appears to have been the ideological blueprint for a bloody invasion. After fierce fighting in the Kyiv area, the affluent commuter town of Bucha was occupied by Russian forces on March 12, 2022. It was retaken by the Ukrainians at the end of that month after a general Russian withdrawal from the region. The local authorities say that 458 civilians were killed during the Russian advance and occupation. Many of these deaths did not appear to be due to shelling or collateral damage. International journalists found streets strewn with bodies. Many had their hands tied behind their backs. A basement torture chamber was found with mutilated victims. There were reports of snipers firing indiscriminately on civilians and 25 reports of. By June, the UN had documented 50 unlawful killings. The Ukrainians have invited the International Criminal Court to oversee potential prosecutions. The Russians say it was all faked.
Была предпринята в городе Буча Киевской области.
This is the main cemetery in Bucha, the town which has become synonymous with one of the worst atrocities committed by Russian forces after they invaded in February of this year. Some 458 civilians were killed in Bucha, 50 still unaccounted for, and the graves immediately around me are those of the unidentified. I'm just looking, they're only known by numbers here. Earlier this week, there was a concluding investigation into the scale of the atrocities and human rights abuses that took place here. And only up until yesterday, they were still burying people here. This is the kind of place that goes down in history for all the worst possible reasons. During the occupation, there were efforts by town authorities to clear the bodies. These three men, Vitaly Chaika, Vitaly Mekakechko and Andrei Makarov, volunteered in the recovery effort. What motivated you to actually go out onto the streets? It must have been very risky.
Ну, конечно, да, есть какое-то было отвращение поначалу, но когда уже начались такие события, все равно все перекрывает.
Вообще не обращаешь внимания на это. Вот как-то не вникаешь.
Ну да, ты не думал.
Там все как-то быстро происходит, на самом деле.
Ну,
Как-то день, да, так летел.
их настолько много вот было, знаете, вот как идешь вот грибы, грубо говоря, уже до такой степени психики было, ну, все.
I mean, some of these scenes must have been very grisly. Had you ever seen a dead body before?
Ну, мы работали на службу, ну, ритуально, да, я там был водителем. Мы согласились помочь, ну, в такое время.
A sense of duty to do this?
Ну, во-первых, это наш город.
Да, и чуть-чуть мы это как бы видели, и нам более, ну, воспринимать это.
Тем более, чем было заниматься? Так хоть
Ну, мы волонтерили, просто помочь. Как-то же, мы же все как-то единый организм, мы должны же бороться с этим всем. Это же проблема не только военных, это проблема каждого человека, она касается.
Are you able to pick up normal life again?
Ну да, возвращаемся, конечно. Все стабильно, на рыбалку ходим. А что? Нам не нужен психолог, понимаешь? Ну надо было бы, я бы готов бы лично был бы поехать еще где-то помочь, если надо было.
we meet Ukrainian photographer Aliena Grom. She moved to Bucha from her native Donetsk when war broke out there in 2014, never imagining that the conflict would follow her here. Her work is startling, haunting, beautiful. Her roots are in street photography and portraiture, but she's not an art photographer, she's a war photographer. Bucha has become synonymous with atrocity. For you, and I know you love it here, is Bucha different now?
Да, очень сильно поменялось. Буча отстраивается сейчас, и действительно очень тяжело уже заметить следы. То, что несколько месяцев назад здесь был такой ужас. Все зелено, цветут растения, чудесный воздух, поют птицы. Но тем не менее, вот эти воспоминания, которые были в Буче, они все равно оставили след. Иногда, когда я еду в машине по Буче, меня душат слезы. Я вижу, идут люди, и обычная мирная жизнь. Но тем не менее, нет-нет, да и закрадывается какое-то воспоминание о том, что здесь было. И я начинаю плакать. И вот все время один вопрос меня мучает. Зачем вы это сделали? Для чего вы это сделали? Как вы могли? Как вы могли разрушить такой мирок, такой чудесный, разрушить жизнь этих людей, которые погибли? Это ужасно.
Why do you think the Russians have done what they've done?
Но в первую очередь они пришли убивать. Они пришли на нашу землю убивать. Они пришли с оружием. Это была самая первая мотивация. Ну и со временем они озлобились. Страх и злоба и полная безнаказанность. Полная безнаказанность. Поэтому были совершены такие убийства.
From what I've seen of your work, much of it focuses very much on portraiture. What is it about portraiture that resonates with you so much? And is there a secret to getting the best out of a portrait?
Мне кажется, что портрет наиболее лучше расскажет об эпохе, времени и людях, которые жили в это время. Мне нравится снимать эмоциональные такие портреты. Секрет есть, да. Я долго для себя пыталась понять, вот как снять настоящий портрет, вот честный портрет. И у меня был такой не очень хороший опыт. Я с человеком, с переселенкой, с которой хотела снять портрет, долго ходила, разговаривала, пыталась понять ее историю, вот чтобы вот был максимально эмоциональный портрет. Но сама так расчувствовала, что мне потом пришлось эмоционально восстанавливаться. Поэтому теперь, перед тем, как снять портрет, я прошу человека подумать о чем-то важном. И перед тем, как фотографировать, делаю большую паузу для того, чтобы он расслабился и сосредоточился. И в какой-то момент он перестает позировать и становится самим собой. И я знаю этот момент, и я фотографирую.
You see, I think that is a really significant point for me as a photographer. Because I'm so used to almost, I hate to use this term, but invading a country. You know, I come in as an outsider, whereas you are a local, you know, and they take you into your confidence. Do you think there is a problem being so close to the community?
Абсолютно облегчает. Я не чувствую никакого барьера. Я могу подойти к любому человеку на улице, вообще к любому, и начать разговоры, и спросить все, что угодно. И у меня нет никаких барьеров. Потому что я тоже участник этих исторических событий.
These people have been through an enormous amount. I mean, how do you win their confidence?
В первую очередь, я честна с этими людьми. Я подхожу и говорю, что я хочу рассказать миру о том, что с вами произошло. Я хочу, чтобы запечатлеть ваши свидетельства в истории. И они начинают мне рассказывать свою историю. Но в
первую очередь эти люди сами понимают, что очень важно рассказать миру, что произошло в Буче. Очень часто после того, как я беру интервью, мы или стоим плачем вместе, или я могу сказать, ну давайте я вас обниму, и действительно я обнимаю этого человека, потому что когда они мне рассказывают о своей боли, у меня идут мурашки по коже, то есть я переживаю им, сопереживаю вместе с ними. Но в первую очередь я снимаю именно для того, чтобы оставить эти свидетельства. Это настоящее свидетельство преступления. Вполне возможно, что они когда-то будут как обвинение для России. Я вот еще хочу спросить у Дэвида о войне вот в Украине. Есть ли что-то такое в Украине, что вас удивило? Вот что больше всего вас удивило здесь?
I think the thing that has struck me most is the determination, the defiance that Ukrainians have shown. I thought that maybe some cracks would begin to appear, some weaknesses, but I find people here just as defiant, if not more defiant now than they were in March. I'm not saying that's a surprise, I'm just saying it's remarkable.
Мы боремся за свободу и за свою землю. Это поэтому происходит. Я буду продолжать снимать фотографии, посвященные войне в Украине, до тех пор, пока не закончится война.
The Ukrainians have not only fought at places of the Russians' choosing, they've struck at targets in occupied Crimea. A series of explosions and fires have occurred at Russian bases there. Some are drone strikes, others sabotaged by special forces or partisans. Ukraine has also struck Russia itself. There have been cross-border strikes and operations around Belgorod. There has also been a car bombing in Moscow, seemingly an attack on Putin's advisor, Alexander Dugin. It killed Dugin's daughter, Daria. Ukraine has not claimed responsibility for any of these actions, but rumours are swirling and a Russian response seems likely. There is an undaunted mindset amongst Ukrainians. You know, they've toughened up throughout the 6 months of this war. They're unfazed. It's been just over a week now since the escalation of attacks on Crimea, and just a matter of days since the assassination of a leading Russian nationalist, Daria Dugin. And so far, a muted response, almost no response from Russia, which is making people a little bit apprehensive and nervous here in Kyiv. And behind me, the city is braced right now and over the next few days as we go into Ukraine Independence Day for what could be an escalation. And indeed, there is a wee tension. There's a nervousness around the city. Just a little while ago, the air raid siren went off, and it's the first time that I've noticed Kyivians moving indoors since I've been here. So yeah, a little bit more tense than normal. The Russians love a good parade. Ever since the revolution, the May Day march past has been a fixture of the Kremlin calendar. It's a chance to flaunt Russian military might to the world. The Ukrainians have their own version, but it takes place on their Independence Day. This year, you might expect it to have been cancelled, but it's going ahead with a dark, satirical twist. So here I am on Kreshchatyk Street in downtown Kyiv, near the Maidan. And this is President Zelensky's idea of a Russian parade. All these burnt out carcasses of Russian vehicles, tanks, armoured personnel carriers that have been dumped here in the centre of the city, not quite in the shape or form
that was originally intended. This is kind of typical, really, of what I've come to realise is Ukrainian black humour. It's a huge, ballsy act of defiance. It's a kind of fingers up to the Kremlin. It's a great way of trolling them. It's a kind of psychological and morale boost to the people here in Kyiv, and just days before Ukrainian Independence Day, which is what this is really all about.
It takes some nerve to crack a joke when the response might be a barrage of missiles. But the Ukrainian spirit throughout has been characterised by dark humour. The internet has overflowed with memes and videos whose main function is to stick two fingers up to Moscow. Russian attempts to go viral have tended to fall flat and are generally mocked and turned against them. The most famous example of Ukrainian humour is also the crudest. In 2014, as things were kicking off in Donbass, a group of football fans from Kharkiv came up with a song which has become an anti-Putin anthem. It doesn't require much explanation. But the general threat level remains mortal. We head south to Mykolaiv, where there are rumours of a major offensive. The checkpoints are getting more frequent, more thorough. There's a lot more military vehicles on the road, so you can feel the atmosphere changing from the comparative normality of Kyiv, the capital. And as we get closer to Mykolaiv, things getting a little bit more tense and obvious militarily. Well, we've just arrived in Mykolaiv, just heading into the city centre, and one of the accompanying Ukrainian military vehicles with us has just had a sort of breakdown come accident. I think it's the axle or something that's gone, so we're waiting on a pickup truck to take it away. It happened near a checkpoint, so we can't get out and film here, obviously. And, as is often the case in sort of conflict or war-torn environments, one of the biggest dangers are actually road traffic accidents. I've seen that on a number of occasions. Behind me is a tributary of the River Bug, and a few dozen kilometres in that direction is the city of Kherson, which is controlled by the Russians, and from where they daily launch missile strikes into Mykolaiv. The battle between these two cities is a crucial one in the battle for the south in Ukraine. And in many ways, the offensive by the Ukrainians here has already started, destroying bridges across the river into Kherson and isolating the Russian 49th Army there, who've been desperately trying to reinforce around that area. This is a key strategic point in the battle for the whole of South Ukraine. This is a downtown sort of industrial area of Mykolaiv. Every side street into this area is blocked off. It's like a labyrinth of checkpoints and block posts, as they call them here. And there's a lot of boarded up buildings. It's clearly been hit a number of times. But it's kind of spooky. You can hear the occasional crump of artillery or rocket fire. We're within range. Where we're standing right now in this part of the city, hence we're wearing some of the body armour on at the moment, The secret is to get what you need and move on. Don't hang around in a place too long, certainly not near strategic positions, military positions, bridges, things like that. catch what you can and move on quickly. You're constantly aware that anything could drop from the sky at any point in time. Well, this is the very southeastern edge of Mykolaiv. It's actually eerily quiet here. These are huge apartment blocks. Normally I would imagine it'd be quite bustling. You can hear the occasional boom in the distance of artillery fire or rocket fire. It's impossible to tell what I'm hearing is outgoing or incoming. You know, just behind me there's a guy on a motorcycle in kind of khakis, fatigues, uniform. You know, no matter where you go with cameras around this part of Mykolaiv and in the city generally, people are incredibly suspicious. They've done sweeps across the city to pick up Russian collaborators and spies and agents. That's happened on a number of occasions. And people here are really spooked by anyone who looks suspicious, odd, foreign, out of place, and particularly if you've got cameras. This is a water distribution pipe stand here, which people have been using for months now. The water here in Mykolaiv is not, drinkable. So people come to this pipe stand every day. There's 10 of these around this city. And obviously it's a real chore for people to do so. So, you get a sense that people are just really fed up. This is the regional government building in Mykolaiv. On March 29th, it was struck by a Russian missile. 37 people died. It was an attempted decapitation of the local administration here. Ukrainian culture and educational institutions also remain targets. This is the National University building in central Mykolaiv. It was hit by rockets just over a week ago at 2 a.m. in the morning. 2 a.m. in the morning is pretty much par for the course in terms of Russian bombardment. They tend to hit during the night, which deprives a lot of the citizens of sleep. There's some workmen trying to repair the communications on the building here. But, this is just one of many sort of civilian institutions which are systemically targeted by the Russians here in the city. Remember, this city has had sustained and heavy bombardment almost constantly since the Russian invasion in February. That's 6 months. One of the worst hit cities in the whole of Ukraine. The Mykolaiv hotel was also hit.
Меня зовут Светлана. Я здесь работаю на стоянке. Как раз 5 дней до того, как это все прилетело, я только устроилась. Вот у нас была красивая гостиница. И здравствуйте, вот еще один прилет, второй. Вот так вот мы спали, ничего не подозревая, ждали прилетов, но было очень громко. Первый прилетел 5:02, второй, третий, четвертый попал в гостиницу. Вот все, что от гостиницы осталось.
We meet Val, a volunteer soldier who began fighting in 2014.
Runs to the front and shoots through how the building exploding and collapsing.
What can you tell me about the kind of operational role of your unit? How does it relate to the mainstream command structure of the Ukrainian armed forces?
We're like military freelancers. We're flexible because we're a small unit. We are experienced because, once again, most of us have fought before. We have specialists in different areas, right? We're well equipped. We have drones, we have snipers, we have medicine to back us up. So to an extent, we're a self-sufficient unit. But in modern war, one cannot operate independently, right? If you're not connected to the guys to the left, to the right, or in the immediate area where you operate, the chances are you'll be shot by your own. So we integrate ourselves into brigades, into special forces units, basically. We help them where we can.
What about your ordinary life? What do you do for a living? Do you have a family?
I own a digital agency. We build websites, applications. It's an international company. So yeah, definitely not a military background. I'm a husband and a father, my beautiful wife and my beautiful 6-year-old daughter. I'm definitely not a professional military man, but the way things unfolded ever since 2014 is forcing me to pick up arms for the second time in my life to defend my country.
How do you keep things together, especially up here?
Well, I think not very hard, I'll be honest with you, but I think it has something to do with the fact that my first engagement was after the revolution, after Maidan revolution of 2014. I took a very active part in that, basically from day one to the day we kicked the president out of the country. And it was actually the first time in my personal life, right, when it became blatantly obvious that Russians do not wish us well. And immediately after the revolution was over, they took Crimea.
Given what's happened in the war, what do you think is the possibility of a sort of reconciliation between Ukraine and Russia?
I don't think that reconciliation with Russia in its current shape or form is possible anytime soon. It's not more about geography or geoeconomic outlook, it's more about what they have in their heads. Because right now we can hear not only Russian officials, not only Russian top brass, but just your average Russians using pretty much fascist lingo, saying that we as a country, we as a nation should cease to exist just because of who we are. We either have to become Russians or we have to cease to exist. As long as this mentality is in there, there's not going to be any reconciliation, there's not going to be any peace. So I honestly have a lot to lose if we don't win. Back in 2014, I did not have a child, I didn't have a house. Now I have my family, I have my child, I have my wife around me. I have my country that I put a lot of effort to, keep the way it is today. So I honestly have a lot to lose, but on the other hand side, I realize that I have responsibility because I already have experience, I already have the knowledge, I already have the skills, I have morale and motivation to do that. So it's better me than somebody who is 20 years old with romantic outlook and romantic view. It's better me than them. For us, it's our land, it's our country, we've lost enough of it, so we'll be fighting for every inch.
So, leaving Mykolaiv now, heading back to Kyiv, quite a long drive. Leaving behind a city which is still under bombardment, air raid sirens going off just as we left, and leaving behind a city which I think is kind of braced for what comes next, and there's a lot of speculation, a lot more talk about an escalation of some kind in the coming days. Who knows what side that will come from, the Ukrainian side or from the Russian side, but there is a growing sense that something is about to happen in Mykolaiv. As things turn out, it was the Ukrainians who take the initiative. The next day, the offensive began. The bridge we left over was shelled. Ukrainian armed forces crossed the river in small boats and surged towards Kherson. By November, that city was back in Ukrainian hands. But the biggest story was to the north. The Ukrainians mounted an even bigger offensive in the lands surrounding Kharkiv. By September, the Russians had pulled back there too. It was a stunning set of victories. In response, Putin ordered a mass mobilization. Around 300,000 conscripts, poorly equipped and hardly trained, they were sent straight to the front into a deadly battle of attrition. Putin then rushed through a series of so-called referenda in each of the 4 wholly or partially occupied oblasts. All voted, unsurprisingly, to become Russian. In September, Putin declared them to be part of Russia. It was the biggest annexation of territory in Europe since the Second World War. The Ukrainian response was swift. Using what seemed to be a truck bomb, they hit the Kerch Bridge linking Crimea with mainland Russia. As winter wore on, the battles around Bakhmut came to symbolize the war. Russia hurled tens of thousands of Wagner Group mercenaries at well-defended Ukrainian positions. It came to be known as the meat grinder. The Ukrainians have proved their will to survive. Western powers have been galvanized to assist. Russia appears to be massing for another major assault, with rumours of up to 500,000 men amassed on the borders once more. 1 year on from the invasion, this war is far from over.